Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, everyone.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all.
Good to see everybody.
Good morning, good morning.
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 Members, the meeting will be starting in a few moments, but just as a reminder, we are live streaming, so anything you may say to each other will be on the public. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome, Wilson Jr. It is 10 a.m. And I'm the presiding officer for today's meeting. I would like to call the August 22nd special call board meeting to order. Please be aware that meeting is being broadcast via the internet, and those present in the board room may be visible to the public. Before we begin, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank and welcome those joining us via video and ask that they observe the following etiquette. Please state your name before you speak, mute your microphone when not speaking, and keep the background noise to a minimum. Members, when I call your name, please announce present. Welcome Wilson Jr. present, Fred Farias,
Present.
Donna Williams,
Present.
John Anwar, Richard Clemmer, present, Stacy Hawk,
Present.
Emma Schwartz,
Present.
Ashley Thomas,
Present.
Daniel Long,
Present.
Katie Saunders.
You just joined that.
Please record in the minutes that we have a quorum. I would now like to hand the gavel to Chairman Fred Farias. Mr. Chairman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Next is agenda item 2, Commissioner's remarks on the Community College Finance Program and College Connect courses. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. So today is a momentous day for our Texas community colleges and for the coordinating board. And I'm so delighted to be here to discuss the proposed FY24 rules today on our new outcomes-based funding model for community colleges and the financial aid for swift transfer or FAFSA program for dual credit that was created by House Bill 8 this last legislative session. This is transformative legislation and also a transformative investment, new funding by the legislature that will improve the lives of hundreds of thousands of Texas families and communities across the state. Today, after invited testimony from Dr. William Serrato, who's the president of El Paso Community College and also our chair of the Texas Association of Community Colleges and the chair of our advisory council for our community college finance system. And you'll hear from Ray Martinez, their association's president on House Bill 8. And then I will provide an overview of the pieces of the legislation related to those proposed rules that are before you today. We'll also hear from coordinating board staff who will provide additional detail on these programs. And I want to say again publicly how much I appreciate the close collaboration with our agency, with the Association of Community Colleges, and with the community colleges. We've been able to move amazingly fast to put this transformative legislation into implementation. I'm so proud of our coordinating board team and excited for our discussion today. Also today, the board has before you the proposed rules on our new College Connect courses. So these rules are going to be very important and intersect with some of the work on community college finance because they'll clarify the ability of colleges to offer dual enrollment courses and dual credit courses to students who have not yet demonstrated that they're college ready, but provide them with the appropriate support so they can have the opportunity both to achieve college readiness and earn transferable college credits. And so with that, I'll end my remarks, Mr. Chairman, and hand it back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Members, any questions for the Commissioner? Hearing none, the next agenda item is invited testimony. The board will hear invited testimony from Ray Martinez, the President and CEO of the Texas Association of Community Colleges, and Dr. William Serrata, Board Chair of the Texas Association of Community Colleges and President of El Paso Community College. Mr. Martinez and Dr. Serrata, thank you for joining us today. Dr. Serrata will begin.
Good morning, Chairman Farias, Vice Chair Williams, and distinguished board members. My name is William Serrata, and I serve as President of El Paso Community College and Board Chair of the Texas Association of Community Colleges. I'd like to begin my remarks by expressing my sincere gratitude to state leadership, members of the Texas Legislature, particularly Representative Gary Van Dever and Senator Brandon Creighton, the members of the Texas Commission on Community College Finance, which was chaired by Mr. Woody Hunt from El Paso, and of course to Commissioner Harrison Keller for his outstanding leadership and steadfast support of our community colleges. As the current chair of the Texas Association of Community Colleges, I have experienced firsthand how the road leading to House Bill 8's enactment has been paved with respect, integrity, and most importantly, with collaboration. 2 years ago, during the 2021 legislative session, it became clear that the funding formula for based on contact hours and enrollment for community colleges no longer reflected the needs of our institutions, our students, or our state. As community college leaders, we are known to be nimble and to adapt to challenging scenarios to continue successfully serving our students' needs. However, having a funding formula that did not reflect our evolving role in producing relevant academic and workforce outcomes was potentially detrimental to maintaining our state's positive economic momentum. As you know, community colleges are funded through three main revenue sources: state appropriations, local property taxes, and tuition and fees. Over the past decade, these sources of revenue have shifted significantly, and today revenue from state appropriations for funding our community college on average is approximately 23%. In response to the fluctuation in revenue during the 2021 legislative session, with support from community college leaders, Senate Bill 1230, authored by Senator Larry Taylor, was passed and signed into law, which established the Texas Commission on Community College Finance. Over the span of the next 2 years, the commission appropriately focused on relevant aspects of community college operations, including state funding for outcomes, student affordability, and capacity building. It was through this process that the voices of community college leaders statewide were heard and ultimately reflected in the commission's final recommendations. As a community college leader, I can say with confidence that the work of the commission provided an opportunity for all relevant stakeholders to take a deep dive into our mission as a sector and to better understand the impact we have, not just on our student populations, but on our local and regional communities. It was through the same process, the work of the commission resulted in unity and coalition among all 50 community college districts. Important momentum was created by sitting at the table with a broad coalition partners, by listening to the needs of our state's business and industry, and most importantly, by aligning the final recommendations of the commission with our state's higher education plan, Building a Talent Strong Texas. We all know that important milestones were reached by House Bill 8. What I would like to emphasize is that in my 30 years in higher education, I have never experienced a more collaborative approach to the development of legislation. The coalition of partners that has resulted from this transformative piece of legislation is one that will have ripple effects for generations to come. House Bill 8 didn't just bring together different stakeholders, it created community and provided a roadmap to successful implementation of public policy. This is how public policy should be done. As we look ahead, I'm also fortunate to serve as the chair of the newly formed Community College Standing Advisory Committee, another testament to the commitment of keeping our sector's voice heavily involved in the process and ensuring that community colleges are heard. It is truly remarkable how the Standing Advisory Committee has worked expeditiously alongside Commissioner Keller and the hardworking staff of the coordinating board to provide the emergency rules that you will consider today. As I conclude my testimony, I urge adoption of the emergency rules packet. While there may be certain aspects of these emergency rules that will need further adjustment during the regular rulemaking process that will follow in the coming months, I can say with confidence that adoption of these rules today will ensure that we begin the House Bill 8 implementation process with integrity and a genuine commitment to success. Thank you for your service to our state. I'd be happy to answer any questions or wait until my colleague Ray Martinez concludes his testimony.
I think the chairman is on mute, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I think he was signaling me to go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Strata, and Mr. Martinez. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Farias, Vice Chair Williams, Commissioner Keller, and distinguished board members. It's good to be back among friends and former colleagues at the coordinating board. My name is Ray Martinez, and I serve as president and CEO of the Texas Association of Community Colleges. So over the past year, one of the more frequent questions that I have received is, why is now the time to revamp the funding model for our 50 community college districts? And the short answer is that we want to ensure greater student and career success. And we also want to preserve the continued vibrancy of our state's economy. In a state as dynamic as Texas, where innovation and growth are not just aspirations, but inherent traits, it's no surprise that we find ourselves leading the nation in job growth. Texas is currently the 9th largest economy globally, with just over 15 million Texans in the civilian workforce. However, Texas is also seeing unprecedented population growth. In fact, over the past 10 years, the Texas population has grown more than any other state in the country. Now, to keep this economic momentum moving forward, we need to align our post-secondary credentials with our workforce needs. Only then will Texans be prepared to meet the challenges of tomorrow. That is why throughout the recently concluded 88th legislative session, Texas community colleges were unified in our support of House Bill 8. A report earlier this year from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas shows that between now and 2035, Texas will create more than 4 million new jobs in industries such as manufacturing, information technology, transportation, construction, and healthcare. But many of these new jobs will be in the category of what the Dallas Fed calls middle tier skills. In other words, jobs that require more than a high school diploma, but less than a 4-year degree. Now, this projection by the Dallas Fed presents both an opportunity and a challenge. While today we have a vibrant state economy, we must bridge the gap between the skills needed by our workforce and the education and training that our citizens possess. And according to data from this agency, from the coordinating board, only 48% of working age Texans currently today hold certificates or degrees beyond a high school diploma. Now, Texas has an array of outstanding higher education institutions. And yet we believe there is no sector better prepared to meet our state's workforce needs than our 50 community college districts across Texas. Texas has always embraced challenges head on, and today we stand together to support a forward-looking solution that puts our community colleges in an even more vital role. Texas community colleges are uniquely poised to address the skills gap, enabling more Texans to earn the credentials necessary for high-demand, high-paying jobs. For example, according to the most recent data, 93% of all career and technical education degrees and certificates were awarded by Texas community colleges. Community colleges enroll approximately 94% of all dual credit students across the state. And perhaps most importantly, Texas community colleges rank as the 6th most affordable in the country in terms of average tuition and fees. Clearly, transforming the funding model for community colleges was a critically important decision by the Texas legislature. House Bill 8 reflects a commitment among all stakeholders to address the needs of both students and the workforce. It directly connects education with employment so that students learn not just for the sake of knowledge, but for the fulfillment of meaningful careers. In a time when the value of higher education is being questioned, Texas stands as a pioneer by connecting community college funding to tangible student-centered outcomes. By embracing data-driven solutions, we tackle enrollment challenges and ensure that the value of higher education remains unquestionable. In conclusion, as Dr. Sadata outlined moments ago, Commissioner Keller and his team have been integral to the success, not just of the recommendations that were produced last November by the commission, but to the passage of House Bill 8. And to be more direct, House Bill 8 would not have passed without the hard work and sustained support of Commissioner Harrison Keller. His stewardship of this process has been profound and impactful. We are tremendously grateful for his efforts and the efforts of the entire agency staff for the strong and enduring partnership that we now have between TAC and the coordinating board. For example, last week, TAC and coordinating board staff co-hosted a webinar via Zoom to answer questions about the new financial aid program for dual credit students, the FAST program. We had over 300 participants on that Zoom call from community colleges across the state, including 22 of our community college presidents and chancellors. Finally, while we support passage of the proposed emergency rules under consideration today, as with any major piece of legislation, we know there will need to be further adjustments along the way. We look forward to that work ahead. Thank you for your dedication to this transformative change. We greatly appreciate the work of this agency. And I'd be happy to answer any questions along with Dr. Sadata. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Thank you, Dr. Sadata. Again, publicly, thank you to the commission. Thank you to Woody Hunt, who chaired that for our state, and Commissioner for your leadership and organizing all that. Thank you all so much. It is, Mr. Martinez stated, it's very transformative for the future of higher education in our state. So members, I'll open it up to any questions or comments for Dr. Sadata or Mr. Martinez.
I would just comment that I was on a couple of committees and it was very impressive how the community colleges in the state came forward in a proactive manner to open up the dialogue and come up with solutions. So, you know, it was really very impressive. I think we're here today because of the openness and effort by the community colleges in that effort. So please tell everybody we appreciate it. And Dr. Serrano, I had one question. Dr. Rhodes tells me that if I were to tour your campus, I would be amazed at how many statues of him are around the campus. I was going to ask Emma if that's the case, but maybe I'll get a chance to tour it and see those memorials someday.
Well, we certainly look forward to welcoming you, Mr. Wilson, on our campus, and we'll show you all of the initiatives that Dr. Rhodes led. So he did a great job in El Paso and did a wonderful job here in Austin. So.
Right.
I had a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
So it sounds very compelling and like it's fully encompassed. I guess one of the questions I had with the changing work requirements that we have, how have you engaged with companies on the requirements and how is that taken into consideration in your funding models?
So, thank you, Mr. Clemmer. I'll begin and then I'll ask Mr. Martinez to weigh in as well. So the Texas Association of Community Colleges created a business advisory council. Mr. Hunt happens to chair that as well. I co-chair it with him. We have business leaders from throughout the state working with our individual college CEOs that are part of that advisory council to ensure that we're on the same page, to ensure that we're providing the talent that our business and industry needs to ensure that the Texas Miracle continues. That council meets regularly. It is staffed through the Texas Association of Community Colleges. Obviously, if anything came good from the pandemic, it was the ability to have Zoom meetings. And so we're able to meet with individuals throughout the state. We'll have some folks here in Austin, and we'll be able to conduct those meetings and ensure that our curriculum is meeting the needs of our business and industry partners. Mr. Martinez, please.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mr. Clemmer. So a couple of comments. The first is that our 50 community college CEOs understand the importance of maintaining and enhancing the relationship with business and industry, both at a statewide level, but especially at a regional and a local level. So the relationship between our community colleges and local employers, local industry is not new. It's been happening for years, and we've understand historically the importance of that relationship, but of course, even more so now because of the new funding model. And one thing that comes out of the funding model is, which we are very supportive of, is the funding not just for the credentials of value that our community colleges produce on the for credit side of our institutions, so academic credentials and workforce education credentials, all very important for our state, but also an array of credentials on the non-credit side of our institutions that are also contemplated and included in this new funding formula. So you may have some community colleges. I'm from Alice, Texas, my hometown down in South Texas. Corpus Christi was the big city for me. There's both Coastal Bend College nearby in Beeville, but also Del Mar College in Corpus Christi. Both of those colleges, but Del Mar perhaps in particular, has a lot of work that they do with the petrochemical industry, where there are various credentials that currently employed individuals can obtain in a short period of time that under this new funding formula could be contemplated as credentials of value. That's vastly important. We already know the importance of being able to establish those credentials in cooperation with local business and industry, but even more so now, Mr. Clemmer, because of this new funding model, it's putting a spotlight on all aspects of our college's operations. Again, not just the important credentials we offer on the for credit side of our institutions, but those equally important on the non-credit side of our institutions. All of that's going to add up to, again, sort of continuing the vibrancy of our state economy as far as we're concerned.
And one of the things, have you taken into account the emerging or changing requirements of our workforce? I mean, one of the examples is the semiconductor industry, where the federal government's spending $51 billion, and Texas is going to put a program in place as well. And Texas is kind of the heart of the manufacturing, but yet one of the requirements, or one of the foremost companies, which happens to be TSMC, is building a plant in Arizona. And their biggest issue is they can't find sufficient workforce associated with it. And, you know, I think it's really an opportunity that we need to be sure that we're looking at requirements and can facilitate that and keep Texas ahead of the rest of the country in taking advantage of the $51 billion that the federal government's going to grant.
No question about that. The relevancy of what are the emerging occupational pathways and the realization that there is a skills gap. Chairman Brian Daniel from the Texas Workforce Commission talks about this often, about the skills gap that currently exists here in the state and how it is incumbent upon our community colleges and our partners at TSDC and our university partners as well, that we are, as a sector of higher education, focused on what those gaps are and what those emerging pathways are, and keep that information as relevant and as real time as possible. There's a lot of initiatives, there are many initiatives going on right now to ensure that our community colleges, our TSDC campuses, our universities have real-time labor market information, for example, that will help highlight what the pathways are to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. So a lot of important work going on. We're glad to be at the table for those discussions.
You're actively engaged with those companies that will be driving so many increases in the workforce to understand the requirements and what can be done.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I think all of our CEOs, if we had all 50 here today, each one of them could come up here and testify unique things that they're doing with their local industry employers, businesses, to ensure that they are in close contact with them. Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you.
Dr.
I'd like-
Ferris, question. Oh,
Yeah, Paige, go ahead.
so to Dr. Serrata and to Mr. Martinez, thank you guys for being here. And this is probably more of a question for Dr. Serrata, but I visited last week with Grayson College President, Dr. Jerry McMillan. I know he's on the Community College Finance Board. And I would imagine you face this in El Paso, but whenever we have these community college districts facing a bordering state, you know, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Louisiana, I would imagine Texarkana with Arkansas as well. Dr. McMillan was describing kind of a funding model that was disappointing. I believe, I don't want to speak for him, but it was maybe a little disappointing to community college districts that border other states. And I'm trying to figure out where this funding fits in, because you have these community colleges that successfully educate Texan students, if that's dual credit, if that's a 2-year associate's degree, or just taking basic classes. And they're Texan students, obviously, first and foremost, we want them to stay in Texas institutions. But these students take a better scholarship, they take a better opportunity, maybe family logistics send them to, in your case, Dr. Serrata, maybe New Mexico State and Las Cruces, and where I'm from, the Sherman-Denison area up in far north Texas, they go to southeastern Oklahoma State and Durant. And I would imagine there's similar stories elsewhere around the state and bordering areas. So is that funding model, is that built into the state appropriations and how successful you are educating the students with credentials of value? Or where does that fit into the funding model?
It's a great question, Mr. Sawyer, and I certainly appreciate the question. What we're looking at is this provides the opportunity, and what Dr. McMillan is referencing specifically is transfer students. There is a metric that looks at transfer students. We're really looking at credentials of value in high demand areas, successful transfer, and dual credit with a purpose. Those are the real 4 outcomes of this particular legislation. And what we're seeing is that there are some institutions, in particular the ones you referenced, all on the borders of Texas, where a segment of our student populations transfer to out-of-state institutions. And that is what Dr. McMillan is referencing with regards to receiving credit for the student who transfers to one of those institutions. I would imagine that as our data becomes more robust, as we work with the clearinghouse to be able to look at this particular data, that we'll be able to incorporate those over time. Right now, we're really focused on Texas. And I certainly understand that. We're looking at students transferring from the community colleges in Texas to universities in Texas, and then being successfully employed within the state of Texas. I would imagine over time, working with Commissioner Keller and his team, that we will take into consideration the small segment. For me, it is probably less than 5% of my students who transfer that transfer in MSU, but it is still 5% of my students. So long-term, we'd love to see that incorporated into the model. But we really needed to focus on Texas initially, just based on how much data that we have between the universities, the community colleges, as well as K through 12. We really have a robust data system within the state proper. And so that is what the focus is initially. But I certainly concur with Dr. McMillan and others that look at transfer partners that may be out of the state. The key is, are those students coming back to the state to work in our economy? And I think that would be the emphasis for us to ensure that and then receive credit appropriately.
Awesome, thank you.
I have a couple of questions. One is, as we proposing that outcome-based funding approach, first question is, have we heard any concern coming out from the community college about or some difficulties, or they voice out any negative about this proposal?
Thank you, Mr. Wong. It's a great question. So community colleges in Texas have been focused on outcomes for a significant period of time. If you look at the Achieving the Dream initiative that started in 2004 in Texas, at the time I worked at South Texas College, we were one of the original 30 community colleges that were selected to participate in that initiative. It then moved forward with completion by design. We changed that to Texas Completes within the state of Texas, and it has since moved forward with the Pathways project. So since 2004, there's been a real laser focus on outcomes at the community college sector. If you look in the presentation that we provided, you look in 2001, we had a combination of approximately 37,000 degrees and certificates that were produced by the 50 community colleges. 10 years later, that was over 77,000 degrees and certificates. 10 years after that, it's well over 120,000. So we've been focused on outcomes. So from my perspective, this shift to where approximately 95% of the funding formula would be based on outcomes is a shift in the right direction. It is where the state needs us to be, and it is where the community colleges already are. I've not heard any pushback on that whatsoever, Mr. Wong.
Yeah, I understand that we've been focusing on the outcome-based, of course. All colleges and university or community college, they all always look at the outcome, of course. But as we stress, we place a lot of emphasis right now on the outcome-based. Do you think that will have some changes in terms of the admission standard and the criteria for a student? Because if you push on the outcome-based, that means we want to show the result more prominently, so to speak, and And in the past, you will have some students just, we want to have all the students coming to community college. But in the past, it's always like, some students would never really have that capacity to go on with the study. So after a couple of years, they got a scholarship and they drop out, and then there's no outcome. But in the past, it's pretty, I wouldn't say it's common, but now we stress based on a lot of focus on the outcome-based result. And do you think that will impact the community college in terms of their admission standard and student criteria and things like that nature?
So I think it's an excellent question. We're very proud to be an open admissions institution with high expectations for the students that we serve. We do have selective programs, nursing and allied health programs in particular, where students have to meet certain criteria to enter those programs. We have wait lists on those programs. Again, I think that this is ensuring that our community college sector is aligned with business and industry needs for our state, to ensure that we're providing that labor pool that is needed to ensure the economic conditions of our state remains as positive as it has been. I don't see any pushback. I cannot provide enough kudos to Commissioner Keller and his team for looking at the non-credit side as well, and being able to ensure that students have that opportunity to come into the community college, receive a skill, go into the workforce, and earn a living wage for those particular skills as well. We've never had an opportunity to receive funding for those particular programs. We've done them because our local communities need them, but we've never had the opportunity to receive state appropriations for those. And so I think that also is a game changer, in ensuring not only that we receive those students, but we provide them the skills necessary to be productive members of our respective communities.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is because of that outcome-based approach, I would just imagine that all community college will be stressing more on helping the students to be successful instead of in the past. Well, of course, we want all the students to be successful, but in the past, students come in and out, and we have the number of students, so that's important, right? We get number of students, that's the funding formula. You got higher number of students, but now, because it's outcome-based, I am assuming that all the community college will be putting a lot of emphasis in terms of counseling or working with the students, trying to make them more successful. Because if they come in, we want to make sure that they get into a path that brings success instead of they drop out and then gone. But then in the past we record this is the admission, this is attendance. But now we want to see they are successful. So I'm hoping that because of this approach, we are encouraging all the colleges, community college, to make sure the student will be more successful, even compared to the past.
Agreed. And I think that will be a focus and will continue to be a focus of the community college sector going forward.
Great, thank you. Other questions for our presenters?
Just one, Ray, does your association have an economic development committee within it? To follow up on Mr. Plummer's comments, if a company is considering moving to Texas and they want to see what kind of workforce we can provide, seems to me that if the community colleges as a group were able to say, no matter where you go in the state, we will develop programs for your job training and needs. I don't know if that's feasible or not, but
yeah, no, I think it's a great thought. I mean, as Dr. Sarada mentioned, we have this business advisory council, which we started several years ago. There is an element to that with the discussions we have with our business advisory council, which are comprised of some of the major employers across the state, along with some of the associations like TAM, the Texas Association of Manufacturers, also sit in as a member of that business advisory council. So we are trying to stay focused on the relevant occupational pathways from a statewide perspective, but also, as you say, I think there is an element of our discussions that focuses in on if there are industries that are looking to move to Texas, then what can we add to that
So you
conversation?
might just reach out to the governor's economic development office and just offer, and just say, hey, we're here if.
I think that actually makes a lot of sense, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a great point, Mr. Wilson. The governor was down here in McAllen. I was with him. The governor has a small business summit around the state. And Mr. Martinez, we are now the 8th largest economy in the world in Texas, he announced. So it's the point being that it's evolving. These programs and the needs, like Mr. Clemmer said, are changing. So it's the state is growing, that's true. And also the opportunities, the needs are growing and they're changing. And as Mr. Wilson, Mr. Clemmer point out, we definitely need to be on top of that. So any other comments for our presenters?
I have one question. Mr. Ramirez, can you speak to the landscape that you see today? Who are the other providers or who's the competition for our community colleges? How else are students getting dual enrollment or credentialing in their adult?
Sure, yeah, so there's dual credit through some of our university partners. So our four-year universities can offer dual credit programs as well, and our TSDC or State Technical College campuses across the state, of which there are 9, and the state has authorized the creation of a few more over the next couple of years. And so those are the other providers, but we don't necessarily consider them as competitors. The higher education infrastructure here in the state, we are very fortunate that we have outstanding public four-year universities, outstanding TSDC system. Our Lamar Institutes and institutions are truly among the very best in the nation. And of course, the excellence offered from our programs in community colleges, we believe is second to none. So we feel an obligation, particularly with this funding model, that we are at the table with our higher education partners to ensure that that Chairman Farias can move from 8th to 7th soon enough, right? So that our economy continues to grow and that we are the model both nationally and internationally for how to grow a state economy. We're not going to do it with the population growth that we've seen, tremendous population growth we've seen over the past decade. There is the potential that we're going to have a greater mismatch of skills to workforce needs if we're not cognizant of that and we don't have information, data, real-time data to help keep us informed, community colleges, TSDCs, our university partners, to ensure that our course and program offerings align to those workforce needs. It's a lot of important work that will get done, not just by our community colleges, but by all of higher education.
And then on the adult workforce credentialing side, what providers do you see in the private sector or workforce doing this, employers doing themselves or from national institutions, or what does that landscape look like?
Well, I think that there are entities that will do credentialing, for the adult workers, if you will. I do think that there's a lot of that happening with our community colleges and even more so because of this new funding formula. So as Dr. Serrata mentioned, within the formula, the primary metrics are credentials of value in targeted fields, transfer to a public university after 15 semester credit hours at a community college, or 15 semester credit hours of dual credit at a community college, and then that's one of the metrics as well. But there are incentives or plus-ups, if you will, in funding for 3 particular categories of population, and that would be economically disadvantaged students, academically disadvantaged students, and adult learners, defined as students 25 years of age and older. One important thing to point out, going back to Dr. Wong's comments earlier, the work of the 12-member commission was to look not just at what the funding model would work best for Texas community colleges, but to look at that large handful of other states that have tried and are currently utilizing outcomes-based or performance-based funding, to learn from their experience and to a certain extent to learn from their mistakes. And so the formula that was adopted by the legislature, passed by the legislature and HBA, and informed by the work of Commissioner Keller and staff here at the agency, looked at what these other states are doing so that we felt that the model that we're putting together here in Texas works for Texas. Again, not in a vacuum, but based upon research and information that we've seen and experience from other states across the country. All of that, I think, combines for us to be poised to have a very successful implementation through this model. But with, again, knowing that any major piece of legislation, there may need to be adjustments along the way.
Thank you.
Okay, any final comments from the board? Questions? If not, I want to thank both Mr. Martinez, Dr. Serrata, for your invited testimony. And also, thank you so much for your leadership for higher education in the state. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, next, members, we're moving to agenda item 4, which is presentations on the financial aid for Swift Transfer FAST program and the Community College Finance Program. Commissioner Harrison Keller, Dr. Charles Quintero Poles, Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, and Ms. Emily Cormier, Assistant Commissioner for Funding, will present this item. Oops, can you hear me? Commissioner Keller will begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on June 9th, Governor Abbott signed House Bill 8 into law codifying this innovative new model to fund our community colleges in Texas. And as the board's already heard, this was the culmination of more than 2 years of work by our Texas policymakers, community college leaders, stakeholder organizations, and our coordinating board team. The heart of this new model is a shift to an outcomes-based funding approach that rewards colleges for awarding degrees, certificates, and other credentials of value. Implementing this new and innovative finance system represents a historic change and opportunity for our state and for the agency. Next slide. And I did want to, next slide, please. And I did want to pick up on some of the points that the board raised earlier about the new finance system. So with these historic changes, the idea is to align policy and funding incentives for our community colleges with the rapidly changing needs of the workforce, but also you'll notice the metrics map onto the metrics that were adopted by the coordinating board in our Talent Strong Texas plan. So in you asked about, well, how can we accelerate the pace of innovation? That's actually one of the key strengths, I think, of this shift to an outcomes-based approach. So when Dr. Serrata was up here testifying, what he didn't tell you is that in the old system, as he worked to streamline students' pathways to success, the state actually penalized him by removing funding from the district. So as he did cheaper, better, and faster for the students, it actually cost the college millions of dollars in state funding. The incentives were exactly wrong because they would focus on seat time as opposed to the quality of the outcomes that El Paso Community College and other colleges achieve. In the new system, the vast majority of funding is going to be driven through a model that is focused on the outcomes, so they can be you can have 8-week terms, 15-week terms, credit by exam. You can do competency-based education, transfer partnerships, and the state's focus is really on the outcomes. So that creates more space for innovation in our system than you see in these other state systems. You asked also about the focus on effectiveness and how do we make sure that students are completing. Well, on one hand, that's a key focus of the system with the shift to an outcomes-based system. But we recognize that some students have additional services they're going to need that are going to cost additional amounts of money for us to be able to produce the outcomes. So incorporated into our outcomes-based system are robust adjustments for students who need more services because they come in not college ready, or they come in as adult learners who've been out of school for a while, or there's students who come from low-income backgrounds and they need other kinds of supports. So the Texas system is both one of the most one of the purest outcomes-based funding systems, but also includes some of the most robust adjustments to pick up those real cost drivers and that are not within the control of the colleges. But I think it's a key point to ask about competitors and collaboration, right? Because again, in the current community college finance system is really zero sum. the colleges are pitted against each other. When one college it gets more funding, another college gets less in the current system. Or if a community college and a university have a transfer partnership or a co-enrollment partnership, and the university delivers some of those semester credit hours, that means that there's an opportunity cost for the community college. In the new system, that actually has incentives for cross-institutional partnerships. It's a dynamic funding formula where the colleges are not in competition with each other, they're only in competition with themselves. And in particular, there's an incentive for co-enrollment partnerships with universities. So this is a pretty dramatic shift for our colleges to be able to sort of clear regulatory brush for innovation, to align with what they're committed to doing for their students, to make sure students succeed, and to make sure that the colleges have incentive to work in partnership with each other and with our universities so we can address our changing workforce needs. So this slide that you have before you lays out the major components of House Bill 8, and the components that we're going to be discussing today are the new funding formula, the Community College Standing Advisory Committee, and the FAST program to provide free dual credit for educationally disadvantaged students. Also on this slide, there were other components of the system that we are not talking about today, that are important components of House Bill 8. So for example, at the college's request, we are standing up a new shared services center to help support operational efficiency and partnerships across the colleges. We're working in partnership with colleges and with universities to be able to provision that real-time labor market information from various sources so they can understand how our regional and state labor markets are changing, and they can be more responsive to those needs. And there's also seed funding that comes to the colleges and new grant funding through the TRUE program for high demand workforce needs. So the House Bill 8 is really not just a finance bill, it's really a comprehensive higher education reform bill. And we're very proud of the work that's gone into bringing these emergency rules that you have today. So next slide. Did want to highlight also that the state budget that was just passed includes $684 million for implementation of the full slate of recommendations for community college finance to help implement House Bill 8 and position Texas to be a national leader. Now, the $684 million is really a starting point because we're transitioning to a dynamic funding formula, and the idea is as quickly as possible in partnership with the colleges. We want to by the next fiscal year, be able to fund the colleges much more on real-time data. If the colleges perform in the outcomes-based funding system, that might mean that there has to be a supplemental appropriations request in the next session. That's a key component of the bill that I think is important to highlight. So shifting from a some certain appropriation to more of a dynamic funding formula that's tied to the outcomes that colleges are achieving. Now, while the majority of the funding is going to go to this outcomes-based funding system with those robust adjustments for student need, there's also a recognition of the higher cost of operating smaller colleges. So there's a component of the system that lines up our property for community colleges to help stabilize funding for smaller community colleges. And the appropriation included an estimated $79 million to provide free dual credit courses to students who qualify for the federal free and reduced lunch program through the FAST program. And that's one of the dynamic components of this new system makes this commitment to free dual credit courses for economically disadvantaged students essentially open-ended. So as more students enroll in those courses who qualify, then there'll be more funding that's transferred to help pick up those additional costs. So that's another key component of the system. That's a pretty fundamental shift. I'll leave it to Chad to explain the FAST program in more detail later in the presentation. But first, I want to defer to Emily Cormier to discuss more details about the new funding model.
Good morning, Emily Cormier, Assistant Commissioner for Funding. So as you've heard, House Bill 8 sets the new structure for a finance model that will reward colleges for their progress towards building talent strong Texas goal, while also ensuring colleges have access to a foundational level of funding to operate based on their available revenue sources. Next slide. Our previous funding model was a static system based primarily on students' time in class. Funding was set for a 2-year time period based on historical data. So the model was not able to easily adjust to changing statewide needs or to local economic issues at a college. Additionally, the old model didn't account for local revenue variances at our community colleges, and it did not take into account the types of students being educated at the institution. Next slide. House Bill 8 laid out legislative intent that community colleges, as locally governed institutions, are responsible for supporting their instruction and operations through tuition and local property tax revenue, and that the state funding needs to be focused on rewarding outcomes that align with regional and state education and workforce needs. So given this framework, the new funding model is split into 2 tiers. The base tier, which composes 5% of available funding, and the vast majority, or 95%, based on student-focused outcomes. While a small percentage share, the base tier is vital to helping support our small, rural, and property-poor institutions in the state. The base tier ensures that while colleges are responsible for funding their foundational operations via local revenue, the state will step in to ensure that colleges have access to resources they need if they're unable to raise that revenue due to conditions in their local community. And so to put this in context, funding for fiscal year 2024 totals around $1.1 billion in the finance model. The base tier is approximately $55.8 million of that, and while only 5% of the statewide total, the amounts of each tier by institutions vary greatly. For many schools who receive this base tier funding, which are predominantly smaller in size, that funding could make up over a quarter of its state funding amount. Moving to the next slide. So while a busy slide, this is intended to lay out the calculation of the base tier. And so what the model is doing is first considering what is a district's basic instruction and operations, or I&O need. So this amount is calculated based on the college's student body using their weighted full-time student equivalents and the number of courses that they deliver to students in a year. So importantly, as part of this I&O calculation, we're looking at the types of students being educated and weighting them for academic or economic disadvantage, or if they're an adult learner. Additionally, we're including a small college scale adjustment for colleges with less than 5,000 FT full-time student equivalents to provide an additional weight on the calculation of their student body needs. This is in response to HB 8's requirement that the base tier be intentional in its support for smaller colleges. The model then compares this I&O need amount against what is called an institution's local share. This is a combination of tuition and fee revenue and local property tax revenue that this college can raise through their local community. The model estimates local share revenue using an assumed tuition and fee rate and a 5-cent property tax assumption. This is done regardless of what a community college decides to charge with their tuition and fee rates or their property tax rates. Colleges that are unable to generate enough local tuition and property tax revenue to meet their I&O needs will be eligible for state funds to close that gap through what is called the base tier funding. So you can see on this slide, we're showing an example of 3 colleges who have different I&O needs and different local revenue estimates. College B would require state funding in yellow to close the gap to be able to meet their I&O needs. Moving to the next slide. So this slide is supposed to lay out the calculation of the performance tier, which, as we mentioned, makes up the majority of funding for the system. This is based on student achievement and looks at the number of credentials of value the college awards, with an emphasis on credentials for high demand occupations, the number of students who earn at least 15 credit hours and transfer to a public university, and the number of high school students who earn at least 15 dual credit hours. Over half of the performance tier funding is allocated based on the award of credentials of value. Credentials of value are expected to provide a positive return on investment within 10 years, such that cumulative earnings exceed initial investment. So this would include your bachelor's, associates, and certificates. And notably, as you heard earlier, the model also funds those so-called short-term workforce credentials. And as we talked about, many of these credentials have not really been systematically defined or collected by the coordinating board in the past. However, to be responsive to House Bill 8's call that we fund these short-term workforce credentials, we stood up an ad hoc data collection And so we could initially include these in the calculation of fiscal year 24 amounts. And we anticipate formalizing this process in the upcoming year. The amount of funding will differ for each outcome, with higher funding provided for credentials of value in a high demand field. High demand fields are intended to incentivize both regional and statewide workforce needs. And additionally, each outcome will be weighted by the student characteristic to account for the fact that some students take a little longer to get there. And so to define that, we're including economic disadvantage, which is Pell recipients, academic disadvantage, which is not TSI ready, and adult learners, those who are over 25 years of age. Moving to the next slide. And so this slide is intended to bring all those pieces together to look at the college's funding. So it's considering the local revenue share that can be brought in partnership with the state funding. And this is also intended to lay out that while the performance tier and base tier will compose different percentage share of an institution's budget, they're all working together to ensure we're rewarding colleges for outcomes and ensuring that community colleges across the state have access to resources to better support their students. Next slide. And this slide is really just to lay out some of the key players in the finance models development and our role moving forward. So I wanted to note that while we're considering the emergency rules necessary to implement House Bill 8 today, we would not have been able to bring these forward without that stakeholder group, the Standing Advisory Committee for Public Junior Colleges. So these individuals are charged with helping us implement this new model, and will continue to lean on them as we move into fiscal year 25 implementation. Additionally, I wanted to note that the role of the coordinating board has also shifted with the passage of HB8. Historically, statute charges the coordinating board with making recommendations to legislature on higher education financing and funding levels. Within the framework established by House Bill 8 and under the auspices of the General Appropriations Act, when you consider and potentially approve these emergency rules, we'll actually be setting the finance amounts for each community college in the state for fiscal year 24. For the upcoming year, we'll begin implementing the distribution of formula funding to each of the colleges in what is a 3-payment system. And while it took a tremendous amount of work to get here, as everyone has mentioned, we all are aware there's some tweaks and areas that will probably need more analysis and consideration for changes in the upcoming cycle of implementation. So ultimately, we'll look forward to getting to a goal of reaching a status where we're dynamically funding those outcomes on a more current basis at our colleges. So that concludes my remarks on the finance model. Move to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Emily. I'm Chad Concado-Pulse, Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs. And in addition to the quite amazing work that's been going on with all of the formula funding activity, there is an additional stream of funding that's available to community colleges to assist them specifically with educating dual credit students through the dual credit programs. Next slide, please. So the financial aid for Swift transfer program is set up in order to allow educationally disadvantaged students to be able to take dual credit courses at no cost. And I want to acknowledge that we've just added a third term in all of our discussions. So there's academically disadvantaged, there's economically disadvantaged, and there's educationally disadvantaged. Educationally disadvantaged means that a high school student has been eligible for the free or reduced price lunch program during their time in high school. And it's actually during any time in the 4 years prior to their enrollment in the dual credit course. So the focus of this program is to really provide community colleges and other public institutions with an additional funding stream to help them provide this opportunity at no cost for the educationally disadvantaged students. For the students participating in the program, in addition to being educationally disadvantaged, they do also need to be attending a high school in a Texas public school district or charter school. And they need to be enrolled in a dual credit course. And the statute does set out the specifics of what qualifies as a dual credit course. But very high level, basically, most all of the dual credit courses meet the criteria for this. But we do want to make sure that they're focused on, those dual credit courses are focused on specific things like being a part of a credential of value, being for foreign language requirements, and the like. Another key piece of the financial aid for Swift transfer program is the tuition rate that is set by the commissioner. The tuition rate for FAST and dual credit courses serves two purposes. First, it serves as the funding rate that participating institutions will receive for the students that are enrolled in these coursework. So if a student is eligible for the FAST program, for every semester credit hour of dual credit coursework that they take, the institution will receive funding at the FAST tuition rate, which is being set at $55 per semester credit hour. It also serves as the maximum tuition rate. So regardless of whether or not a student is eligible for the FAST program and for the institution to receive FAST funding, participating institutions will also cap their tuition rates, that they may not charge a per semester credit hour amount higher than the maximum tuition rate, the FAST tuition rate that's set. They can absolutely charge a tuition rate that is less than the FAST tuition rate, but by signing up for the FAST program, institutions are indicating that any student in a Texas public school district or a charter school will not be charged a tuition rate higher than the FAST tuition rate. So those are some key mechanisms of the program. Over the coming weeks, we will be working with institutions to roll this program out, to identify those institutions that will be participating, so that we can start providing them with the information so that they can start waiving the tuition and fee charges for the eligible students. And then based on reporting, we'll be providing them with funding. Because of the nature of the program and the different requirements, we do foresee this as being a program that will grow each semester. So some institutions may not participate in this first semester while they're still figuring out the logistics, and we'll be able to bring them into the program in the spring. And we'll also be able to bring them into the program in the next fiscal year. What we want to do right now is make sure that we are providing as much support to the institutions to answer all of the questions they may have so that they can feel very comfortable entering into the program and complying with all of the expectations. And with that, I will turn it back to the commissioner to wrap us up.
Great. Thank you, Emily and Chad, for the so I wanted to wrap up the presentation just by laying out what the road ahead looks like for us as we implement these changes. So first, again, as several times, the implementation of House Bill 8 has required and will continue to require a major effort from our community colleges in deep collaboration with our higher education, business, philanthropy, and community partners to make sure that we can ensure a smooth transition to carrying out this new model. This is a totally new direction. It's disruptive for the business models of our community colleges. This is a huge lift for the colleges. It's a huge lift for the agency. We could not be moving this fast without these strong partnerships. So on the timeline, you're going to see the significant dates that will affect our work. So since the governor signed House Bill 8 into law earlier this summer, the coordinating board's working in partnership with the colleges and other stakeholders to develop the emergency rules you'll consider today so that the new system can be deployed starting September 1, 2023. Now, there's going to be plenty of work and collaboration that our agency is going to have to engage in between September and January. That will be crucial to refining and finalizing the fiscal year 2024 regular rules and the fiscal year 2025. So again, so the emergency rules is through the first 6 months of the year. The permanent rules for FY 24 will actually be adopted in January. So we'll have another conversation with the board about the FY 24 rules. There'll be some, I'm sure some tweaks and clarifications we have to make for those regular rules that come due in January. But then there won't be much time before we're back at it at the April meeting to adopt the FY 25 rules. So most of the rules for going into FY 25 will come in April, and then there's these final rules to be sure that we have all of the elements in place that come in July 2024. So this is just the first step of what's going to be a very busy next year. Over the summer, the coordinating board stood up a webpage on our agency's website that's got more information and resources, including the actual model with every data point recalculation, and we intend to keep that model updated. So it's totally transparent about what the drivers are for the funding determinations for the colleges. And our goal with that online resources and also with other resources that you find there is just to make sure that we're totally transparent about what the rules are, where the model stands, so folks can understand the transformative changes from this new system. And before I wrap up and we shift to questions, I'd like to say one more time just that the support to deliver this innovative new funding model and bring us where we are today only came about because of that close collaboration, input, and partnership with community college leadership, with the Texas Commission for Community College Finance, many people who are in this room who worked closely with our policymakers in the business community. And I wanted to say a special thanks to Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Speaker Phelan, and their teams, of course, to Representative Van Deaver and Senator Creighton for carrying the bill, and to their staff. Special thanks to my friend Ray Martinez, who is a forceful proponent for community colleges and been a true partner to the coordinating board. I also want to say happy anniversary to Ray Martinez, but it turns out that we are having this meeting on Ray's first anniversary as the president of the Association of Community Colleges. Thank you again to the TAC leadership, especially Dr. William Thurada. And again, thank you to Woody Hunt, who was chairman of the Texas Community College Finance Commission. As Woody said, to solve these challenges, being incremental isn't enough. We need to be bold. And today, we're proud to bring you rules to implement a bold new system for advancing the coordinating board's goals for building a healthy, strong Texas. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions you have about the new system, the proposed rules, the implementation time.
So Emily, do we get the money upfront for the biennium and then we distribute it 3 times a year?
We will receive the state funding appropriations for the community colleges on September 1st for 1 fiscal year. And so we will distribute that money to the colleges over 3 payments. So they'll receive 50% of their formula funding entitlement by mid-October. And then the remaining 2 payments will be equal, and those will be in, I believe, February and June.
But the legislature approved the second year for us to get the money as well for the biennium.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. So that will come into our agency on September 1st.
And then Charles, the dual credit courses, do we set up the framework that if they fit in that box, it's automatically, or do we approve them? Who approves the so-called dual credit course?
The courses are just courses that already exist, and if an institution determines that it meets the definition that's set out in rule, then they're able to submit those for funding.
So each separate institution determines with the high school or charter school providers what if they're able to.
Correct. So we're really layering this on top of a very strong dual credit program that already exists. And so it doesn't change the way that institutions work with their ISD partners and their charter school partners. It just provides this extra level of funding to help them, the institutions, use that funding and other funding sources to be able to offer this at no cost to our educationally disadvantaged students.
So if I could weigh in just a little bit, Chad, so they're already in statute and in the rule, there's some criteria, like they need to be core courses or courses, they could be courses that apply to direct transfer degrees or that count towards workforce credentials. So there are some guardrails on the types of courses that can be offered as dual credit courses that would be eligible for FAFSA. So as Chad said, that since those guardrails have been established, then just eligible courses that are offered to eligible students automatically qualify.
So if I'm a high school student, the high school have an agreement with a specific community college or provider
That's
for
typically.
dual
what
credit, or
happens.
do I have a choice of picking from a menu of?
There's both the specific partnerships that institutions have created with different ISDs or charter schools. There may also be cases where a student simply pursues an opportunity on their own. So they might not be taking it for high school credit, but they're pursuing enrollment in a course that they are going to be able to use towards education when they move on to the post-secondary level. So there are those opportunities, and I'll turn it over to the commissioner.
Yeah, just to weigh in on one point, Chad, that so there are high schools also that have multiple partnerships. So as came up earlier in the testimony, so for example, you might have a high school that has a dual credit partnership with their local community college, and they also have a partnership with one or more universities that offer dual courses as well.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to communicate to these high school students that this is available to them, because it's a win-win for the student in the high school and the community college to wrap some of those up.
Yeah, that's a key point. So already this year with the Texas Education Agency, we've been working to get the word out. We continue to work on that so that students understand that they have the opportunity to take these dual credit and dual enrollment courses at no cost. So as long as a college or a university has opted into participation in FAFSA and met the criteria, then that creates this powerful new opportunity for students to be able to take courses and earn credentials while they're in high school at no cost. So they can earn.
Yeah, which is huge.
They can earn a whole associate's degree for transfer at no cost to them and their family.
Very good. Members, any other questions or comments for the panelists?
I have a question if Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Clemmer.
So I had a question about the $55. I'm sure the cost to deploy a force is different in Dallas or Houston than in rural Texas. How did you do that leveling, and was that do all the community colleges agree with that one fixed price?
We did survey and work with the Association of Community Colleges to look at what the distribution is like pricing, and there's some wide variation. So there's colleges and universities that charge less. There's some that charge a lot more. There are colleges that have different pricing for different kinds of courses. And then some colleges discount for economically disadvantaged students, and some colleges aren't able to offer that. So we looked at what that distribution looks like. The $55 is also in the range of the what the formula rate is for low division academic courses for our universities, for general academic institutions. So as a starting point, we felt like when we looked at the distribution of what the pricing looks like now, and then looked at the sort of what might be a reasonable starting point, this seemed to be reasonable. So it started at we'll start at 165 now. Again, this is a rate that's adopted by rule, so we will be coming back to y'all to set a rate for FY25 and potentially FY25 and going forward. So one of the recommendations I'd like to make to the board is that we find some way to index that appropriately so that there's some predictability in what those rates look like. But what that does is it helps level the playing field across colleges and universities. So even if students don't qualify to be able to take the courses at no cost, then you've got some more consistency of what pricing for dual credit looks like across the state for all the students. So we're not going in the direction of sort of free college in Texas, but we do have a little more consistency in pricing for dual credit and dual enrollment as a result. Thank you.
Members, any other questions or comments on item 4? If not, thank you, Dr. Quintero Poles, Ms. Cormier, and Commissioner Keller. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I think
Yes.
Ms. Williams was, I think, trying to ask a question, but I think she's gonna have trouble with my.
Oh, Ms. Williams?
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Are you on mute, Ms. Williams?
It doesn't look like she's on mute, but we can't hear her.
Maybe she's. Ms. Williams, would you like to speak?
I think she's waving this off.
Or she could be speaking to somebody else.
I think
Okay,
she's passing for now.
okay. Let's move on then, if we may. Thank you all again, panelists, very much. We'll move on to agenda item, which is next 5, which is public testimony. We only have one individual registered today to provide testimony in favor of agenda item 6A8. We will hear that testimony when we reach that agenda item later in this meeting. Now we will move to agenda item 6, adoption of rules. Agenda item 6A is the proposed rules. Agenda item 6A1 is consideration and possible action to repeal Board Rules 1.156 through 1.163 and adopt on an emergency basis new Chapter 1, Subchapter K, Board Rules 1.156 through 1.162 concerning replacement of the Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Committee with the Standing Advisory Committee for Public Junior Colleges. Ms. Emily Cormier will present this item and be available for questions. Ms. Cormier.
This first item relates to the repeal of the current Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Committee and its subsequent replacement with the Standing Advisory Committee for Public Junior Colleges. So House Bill 8 makes a change in how we get feedback from the community colleges on their financing. Historically, the two-year colleges in the state, which included community colleges, state colleges, and technical colleges, had what is called the Formula Advisory Committee. There's also a Formula Advisory Committee for general academic institutions and health-related institutions. And these groups meet in the fall after a legislative session to discuss formula funding, any changes to the formula that's needed, and then bring recommendations forward to the coordinating board for consideration. So House Bill 8 removes the community colleges from this process and instead creates the Standing Advisory Committee for them. And this is in response to the fact that this model is more dynamic and we're going to need ongoing counsel on a regular basis to implement this new system. So due to this, we're repealing the existing two-year Formula Advisory Committee. And the next item on your agenda will then bring forward the state colleges and the technical colleges into the general academic institutions Formula Advisory Committee to make sure they have continued representation in that process. So then after that repeal, we're going to replace it with that Standing Advisory Committee, which will have 12 members composed of CEOs, CFOs, institutional researchers, provosts, and other experts in community college financing. And there's a required minimum meeting of one time a quarter, and a report due each year. And the focus of the group will be on the consideration of the new finance system, as well as any other charges set forth by the commission. So that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Cormier. Members, do you have any questions? If not, consideration and possible action to repeal Board Rules 1.156 through 1.163 and adopt on an emergency basis new Chapter 1, Subchapter K, Board Rules 1.156 through 1.162 concerning replacement of the Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Committee with the Standing Advisory Committee for Public Junior Colleges. Do I have a motion, please?
I'll move.
A motion by Ms. Schwartz. Do I have a second? Who was the second? Do I have a second?
I think that's Donna waiting.
Okay.
You have 2 seconds.
2 seconds.
Okay, second by Ms. Williams. Any discussion, first of all? If not, members, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? No. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 6A2, which is consideration and possible action to adopt on an emergency basis the proposed amendments to Board Rules 1.164 through 1.167 concerning changes to the membership of the General Academic Institutions Formula Advisory Committee. Ms. Emily Cormier will present this item and be available for questions. Ms. Cormier.
So as I mentioned, this item is connected. This just brings forward the 3 Lamar State Colleges and the Texas State Technical College onto the General Academic Institution Formula Advisory Committee. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions for Ms. Cormier? If not, do I have a motion to adopt on an emergency basis the proposed amendments to Board Rule 1.164 through 1.167 concerning changes to the membership of the General Academic Institutions Formula Advisory Committee? Motion? By whom? I'm sorry?
Clemmer and Hawk.
Thank you. A motion by Mr. Clemmer and a second by Ms. Hawk. Any discussion? If not, members, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? No. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 6A3 is consideration and possible action to repeal on an emergency basis Board Rules 9.28 through 9.29 relating to certification of community colleges as eligible to receive state appropriations. Ms. Emily Cormier will present this item and be available for questions. Ms. Cormier.
So community colleges are required to certify compliance with certain statutory provisions and coordinating board rules in order to receive state appropriations. The coordinating board is required to collect these certifications on an annual basis, and then the commissioner is required to provide a list of colleges who have certified compliance to the state auditor and the comptroller prior to them receiving their state appropriations. The existing rules just reiterate those requirements and then also govern the process by which we transmitted those certifications to the comptroller and state auditor. So these rules are recommended for repeal because we plan to replace them in a new consolidated chapter relating to compliance monitoring and auditing based on changes in House Bill 8. And so that subchapter of code will come before you on a later agenda item. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Cormier. Members, any questions? If not, do I have a motion to repeal on an emergency basis Board Rules 9.28 through 9.29 relating to certification of community colleges as eligible to receive state appropriations? Motion?
So moved, Ashley Thomas.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Motion by Ms. Thomas. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second with that, Mr. Clemmer.
Yes.
Thank you. Members, any discussion? If not, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? No. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 6A4. Consideration and possible action to adopt on an emergency basis proposed amendments to Board Rule 9.677 relating to funding for baccalaureate degree programs at community colleges. Ms. Emily Cormier will present this item and be available to answer questions. Ms. Cormier.
So under the previous community college funding structure, prior to the passage of House Bill 8, there was a provision in the education code that allowed 4 institutions who had what is referred to as the pilot baccalaureate programs to be funded under a separate funding structure than the regular contact hour funding. These were basically the very first batch of programs offered by the 2 years in the state, and they received funding for their junior and senior level courses at a level equivalent to the funding provided to our public 4-year institutions in the state. House Bill 8 has now removed this differential treatment, and instead the award of a bachelor's degree by these 4 institutions would be funded under the performance tiers, the same as any other college in the state. So this amendment would remove provisions that created the separate funding structure for these programs, and that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Cormier. Members, do you have any questions for Ms. Cormier? If not, do I have a motion to adopt on an emergency basis proposed amendments to Board Rule 9.677 related to funding of baccalaureate degree programs at community colleges?
So moved. This is Donna.
Okay, motion. Thank you by Ms. Williams. Do I have a second?
Second, Ashley Thomas.
Second by Ms. Thomas. Thank you. Any discussion, members? If not, members, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition, no? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 6A5, which is consideration and possible action to adopt on an emergency basis proposed amendments to Board Rule 13.1 related to definitions pertaining to financial planning at institutions of higher education. Ms. Emily Cormier will present this item and be available for questions. Ms. Cormier.
So this amendment is really a cleanup in our chapter 13, and so it will provide more precise terminology in our definitions for financial reporting at institutions. So in these definitions, we're separating terms for the board, coordinating board, and coordinating board staff to help make a distinction between actions taken by our governing body, the agency staff, and the agency as a whole. We're defining census state in response to household aids requirement that we put data reporting requirements in rule, and the census date is the deadline for institutions to submit data relating to students in attendance for purposes of formula funding. And then finally, we had previously lumped the two-year institutions in the state into one definition. Due to the kind of different funding that the state provides to each of these different sectors, we're now separating this into three distinct definitions for the public junior colleges, the state colleges, and the technical colleges. And so the revised definitions will now align more closely with the education code and with the different sectors and categories used by our state appropriators. So that concludes my remarks on this item.
Thank you, Ms. Cormier. Members, do you have any questions? Do I have a motion to adopt on an emergency basis proposed amendments to Board Rule 13.1 related to definitions pertaining to financial planning at institutions of higher education? Motion?
So moved. This is Donna.
Motion by Ms. Williams. Thank you. A second?
Second, Stacy Hawk.
Thank you. Second by Ms. Hawk. Any discussion? Hearing none, members, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Hearing no nos, the motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 6A6, consideration and possible action to repeal on an emergency basis Board Rule 13.62, which is related to community college financial information reporting. Ms. Emily Cormier will present this item and be available to questions. Ms. Cormier.
So this agenda item and the next one both relate to an approach that we took to basically find places in our administrative code that pertain to community college financial reporting, in which case we're going to repeal them and then put them into a consolidated subchapter relating to financial reporting to make it easier for our agency and institutions to find. So for this item, the coordinating board is required to publish a manual in consultation with the comptroller specifying requirements for community college annual financial reports. So this will remove how we update this manual, and the governing of the financial reporting will now be included in a later subchapter that will come for you. So that concludes my remarks on this item.
Thank you, Ms. Cormier. Members, do you have any questions on this topic? If not, do I have a motion to repeal on an emergency basis Board Rule 13.62 related to community college financial information reporting? Motion?
So moved, Stacy.
Thank you. Motion by Ms. Hawk. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Williams. Thank you. Any discussion, members? If not, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, no. Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 6A7 is consideration and possible action to adopt on an emergency basis proposed amendments to Board Rule 13.63 related to community college financial information reporting. Ms. Cormier will present this item and be available to answer questions. Ms. Cormier.
So similar to the last item, this is just finding the community college specific requirement relating to financial reporting, repealing it, and then it will be in a later consolidated subchapter. So that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Cormier. Members, do you have any questions on this particular topic? If not, do I have a motion to adopt on an emergency basis proposed amendments to Board Rule 13.63 related to community college financial information reporting? Do I have a motion, please?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Clemmer, a second.
Second.
Second by Ms. Thomas. Any discussion? If not, members, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition, no. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 6A8 is consideration and possible action to adopt on an emergency basis new board rules in chapter 13, subchapter P, 13.470 through 13.477 concerning financing for community colleges. Members, we have public testimony in favor of this agenda item. We will hear testimony after the staff presentation. Ms. Emily Comier will present this item and be available to answer questions. Ms. Comier.
So this agenda item is really the main focus and implementation of our community college finance system. So since we already had a pretty comprehensive discussion, I'll just highlight each of the sections as we move through. So Rule 13.472 lists the definitions that are pertinent to the finance system. And some key ones are the fundable outcomes. So the outcomes authorized under House Bill 8 include those fundable credentials awarded, the transfer to a general academic teaching institution, and the award of 15 semester credit hours of dual credit or dual enrollment. The fundable credentials include credentials of value, which are the bachelor's, associates, and certificates, and then also the short-term workforce credentials, such as occupational skills awards and those institutional credentials leading to a life insurance certification. There is a contact hour threshold to determine fundable institutional credentials leading to licensure certification. Academic disadvantage is defined as not TSI ready, and economic disadvantage is defined as a Pell Grant recipient. Adult learners are also denoted as age 25 or older. I would also note that section 13.472 17E3 sets out the methodology for high demand fields. High demand fields is based on a statewide list of occupations projected to have the most new openings in a higher ed region, supplemented by a regional aspect to ensure every region has their top 5 occupations represented. This section erroneously contained a typographical error, so board staff will correct the error by changing an or to an and. Rule 13.473 establishes those calculations for the base year. So as we discussed, base year funding is looking at the instruction operations or I&O need at a college compared to the institution's local share estimate. I&O is the measure of a college's essential operating need, which is a function of its student body or basic allotment, and the courses delivered or contact hour funding. Local share is the measure of a college's local resource availability to meet its I&O needs, which is the estimate of student tax collections and tuition fee collections. The estimates use a static tax and tuition rate to create a consistent estimate across the state, regardless of the individual local characteristics of a college. If local share is greater than I&O, then base year funding is 0. Otherwise, the state steps in to fund the difference. Rule 13.474 establishes the calculations for the performance year. The rule lists each of the outcomes that are eligible to receive for performance year funding, the funding rate for each outcome, and then the student characteristics that provide for added funding on each outcome. Rule 13.475 establishes a formula transition provision. And so what this basically means is that after we calculate how much funding an institution is entitled through the base and performance tier, we will then ensure that a community college district does not receive less in formula funding in fiscal year 2024 than it did in formula funding appropriations in fiscal year 2023. So this was done to really smooth this transition period to the new model. Rule 13.476 sets out the payment schedule for what is called non-formula support items and formula funding payments. So non-formula support items will be paid to each institution by September 25th of a fiscal year. And then formula amounts will be paid those 3 times a year. So 50% in the fall and then 2 equal payments in the spring and summer. Rule 13.477 establishes the final process or closeout that the coordinating board will undertake to finalize a fiscal year's formula funding payments for community colleges. And so the closeout process will make any adjustments needed to payments based on data updates that might have occurred in the fiscal year. And we'll also make sure that institutions have notice that the coordinating board has determined that funding has been fully delivered in a fiscal year. That concludes my prepared remarks on this section. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Comier. Next, members will hear public testimony. We have one individual, Mr. Renzo Soto, who registered to testify today. Mr. Soto, please come forward. So, Mr. Soto, your testimony today is limited to 3 minutes. Please begin by stating your full name, where you're from, and who you represent. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I do have some.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I do have some written comments. I'm not sure whether to go ahead and provide that to the board members here in the room or not. But to begin, for the record, Renzo Soto from Austin, Texas, speaking on behalf of Texas 2036. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in favor of the rules today. We are glad to lend our support. And just to dive right in, we know implementation will be iterative, so that we offer our comments today for fiscal year 2024. We're prepared to take a longer term approach for our suggestions. Our written comments contain all of our recommendations, but I'll cover a few specific ones today on 3 topics: dual credit, credentials of value, and the high demand field methodology. Start with dual credit. We have tremendous opportunity for cross systems impact when considering the potential for alignment between community college finance systems and school finance systems here in the state. House Bill 3 from 2019 created outcome funding for schools to successfully graduate high school students with post-secondary credentials, and with House Bill 8, that same incentive is now amplified for community colleges with the dual credit and credentials of value fundable outcomes. However, that does only speak from the finance system's perspective. In practice, practitioners need clear, actionable information with which to guide students to success. And we have 2 recommendations to achieve this. First, in line with HB8 language, the dual credit fundable outcome should stay laser focused only on rewarding coherent sequences to ensure that practitioners can guide students towards the dual credit courses they need to take to actually earn a credential. And second, it should be clarified that the hours required to earn the transfer and dual credit outcomes are independent of one another. State data shows that students earning at least 30 hours prior to transferring are more likely to complete a bachelor's degree than students who complete fewer hours. And so HBA, we believe, should incent colleges to ensure that students are as ready as possible for a university level education, as well as afforded opportunities to earn a credential. Moving to credentials of value, we have some recommendations to guarantee ROI for students and employers. We know stackable credentials are becoming increasingly popular, thereby changing students' accessibility of different pathways and options to access their desired careers. And so while we understand the current necessity of some of the ICLC contact hour thresholds in the rules, we believe that these guardrails could, in the long term, unintentionally leave out some more valuable opportunities. And in addition to that, we see that in the formula runs, some of these ICLCs validates that colleges are indeed certifying that some students are going on to earn their license and certification after their exam. And we believe that we should remain consistent in only rewarding those credentials that have proven workforce value that is validated by employers. And finally, as a long-term solution, we do suggest that the coordinating board leverage the tri-agency and existing statutes to obtain the data needed to lift these thresholds and assess credential linkages with workforce demands. Just very quickly on high demand fields, we know that the rules proposed using the statewide median wage to look at some of the occupations that are most in demand in the regions. We eventually recommend transitioning to a self-sufficient wage to align with state workforce development legislative charges. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Soto. Thank you for your testimony. Members, do you have any questions for Ms. Cormier?
For
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Soto's suggestions just regarding the implementation, or is that change, would they suggest in the way the wording of the amendment is?
At this time, the rules do not take into account the suggestions that were just laid out. I believe that those would be considered for our fiscal year 2025 implementation.
Okay. Do I have a motion to adopt on an emergency basis new board rules in chapter 13, subchapter P, 13.470 through 13.477 concerning financing for community colleges? Do I have a motion?
So moved, Ron Wilson.
Thank you. Motion by Mr. Wilson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Schwartz. Any discussion? Hearing none, members, so those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? No. Not motion passes. Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Soto. Thank you, Ms. Cormier. Next, members, we move on to agenda item 6A9, which is consideration and possible action to adopt on an emergency basis new board rules in chapter 13, subchapter Q 13.500 through 13.506 concerning the financial aid for Swift Transfer Fast Program. Members, you have supplemental materials for this item printed in goldenrod paper. Dr. Charles Quintero Poles, Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, will present this item and be able to answer questions. Dr. Quintero Poles.
Thank you very much. So following up on our discussion earlier about the financial aid for Swift Transfer Program, these rules would allow us to administer the program and put into place the specifics so that we can begin working with institutions on the program. I'm going to walk through the individual sections and happy to answer any questions at the end. Section 13.501 sets out the definitions for the program to make those clear for institutions. For example, setting out the definition for a dual credit course and the expectation that any course satisfies either a requirement necessary to obtain an industry recognized credential, certificate, or associate degree, a foreign language requirement, a requirement in the core curriculum, or a requirement in the field of study curriculum. Section 13.502 sets out who the eligible institutions are. All public institutions of higher education in Texas are eligible to participate in the program. If an institution chooses to participate in the program, then they are acknowledging that they will not charge students attending high school in a Texas school district or charter school tuition for a dual credit course that is higher than the fast tuition rate. And they are also acknowledging that they will ensure that any eligible student incurs no cost for enrollment in the dual credit course. And that includes, but is not limited to, tuition fees, book supplies, and other course expenses. Section 13.503 sets out who the eligible students are for the program. Students that are eligible to enroll at no cost include those that are enrolled in a high school in a Texas school district or charter school, enrolled in a dual credit course at a participating institution, and who are educationally disadvantaged in any of the 4 school years preceding the academic year in which the student is enrolled. Section 13.504 sets out the fast tuition rate for the 23-24 academic year at $55 per semester credit hour. Section 13.505 sets out the funding formula and acknowledges the frequency with which we will provide funds to institutions. We will do that each semester, fall, spring, and summer. And it also sets out the calculation. I mentioned earlier that we will look at the number of credit hours taken by eligible students. We will multiply that by the fast tuition rates, and that funding will be dispersed out to the institutions. It also sets out that we will use both coordinating board reports that we receive that are certified by the institutions, as well as TEA data regarding educationally disadvantaged students that we receive from the Texas Education Agency in order to verify the funding calculations. And then 13.506 is simply a reference to acknowledge that like the other funding through HB8 that's being considered, that the funding provided through this program is also subject to subchapter R, which will be reviewed later in relation to program reporting, audit, and over allocation. That concludes my remarks. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Quintero Poles. Members, do you have any questions?
So the over allocation, you said it's going to be addressed later? Is that?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions for Dr. Quintero Poles? If not, do I have a motion to adopt on an emergency basis new board rules in Chapter 13, Subchapter Q, 13.500 through 13.506 concerning the financial aid for Swift Transfer Fast Program? Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
A motion by Ms. Thomas. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Williams. Thank you. Any discussion? If not, members, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? No. Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 6A10 is consideration and possible action to adopt on an emergency basis new board rules in Chapter 13, Subchapter R, 13.520 through 13.529 relating to reporting, audit, and over allocation of community colleges. Mr. Paul Mayer, an interim assistant commissioner for internal audit and compliance, will present this item and be available for questions. Mr. Mayer.
Good morning.
Morning.
New board rules in subchapter R relate to reporting, audit, and over allocation for the new community college finance program. Specifically, these proposed rules set out policies and procedures for public junior colleges to submit certifications of compliance, submit required reporting to various reporting collection mechanisms established by the reporting board, and the rules also describe how the reporting board will conduct audits, review required reporting for data errors, and correct those errors through either a payment due to an under allocation or funds, under allocation of funds, or the recovery of funds due to an over allocation. Next, I'd like to briefly touch on a few of these rules. First, Rule 13.523 contains policy and procedures regarding submission of certifications of compliance by public junior colleges. As you heard in an earlier presentation, community colleges are required to submit a certification of compliance with statutory requirements, required to submit certification of compliance with statutory requirements and reporting board rule to establish eligibility for state appropriations. We have repealed the previous rules related to this requirement and instead have added this new rule, 13.523, to align with HBA changes. This rule contains procedures necessary for public junior colleges to submit certifications and also provides for notification by the institution of any ongoing or unresolved audit findings that may preclude the institution's certification, provides that the college disclose the finding, provide an explanation and a resolution. The commissioner then has the authority in determining the college's compliance for purposes of receiving a scheduled payment. Next, Rule 13.524 describes the required financial and academic reporting for institutions to submit data necessary for the coordinating board to administer the state community college finance program. The coordinating board collects data through a variety of established mechanisms: the community college annual reporting and analysis tool, annual financial report reporting, the report of fundal operating expenses, education data systems reporting, and through ad hoc reporting as necessary. The data from these tools provides a cornerstone of the financial modeling necessary to determine precise funding amounts for the public junior colleges. Next, Rule 13.525 establishes the process for the commissioner to review required reporting for errors and formally establish when a data reporting error results and material impact in formula funding. This rule establishes parameters and expectations for the methods the coordinating board will use to detect data errors, as well as how the commissioner will make a formal determination of the data reporting error resulting in a funding adjustment. Next, Rule 13.528 lays out the process for the coordinating board to recover over allocated funds in the event a public junior college has received more funding than was due. This rule establishes a fair procedure with due process for institutions of higher education, giving them notice and the opportunity to submit a written appeal in the case of an adverse funding adjustment by the commissioner. The procedures ensure the coordinating board is accurately dispersing appropriate funds as intended by the legislature, while also providing flexibility for recoupment of funds. This flexibility includes providing an option to recover funds either in a single payment or over a 5-year time span, thus limiting adverse financial impacts to public junior colleges. Lastly, Rule 13.529 establishes how the coordinating board may provide for a funding adjustment via the closeout process as discussed in prior agenda item. This adjustment could be made due to not enough funding or under allocation based on the established criteria. That concludes my remarks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members, do you have any questions? If not, do I have a motion to adopt on an emergency basis new board rules in Chapter 13, Subchapter R, 13.520 through 13.529 relating to reporting, audit, and overallocation for community colleges. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Clemmer, a second.
A second, Emma.
Second by Ms. Schwartz. Thank you. Any discussion, members? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition, no. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 6A11, which is consideration and possible action to adopt new board rule Chapter 4, Subchapter D, 4.86 concerning the establishment of College Connect courses. Members, you have supplemental material in this item. It's printed on the goldenrod paper. Dr. Janelle Strother, Assistant Commissioner for Student Success, will present this item and be available for questions. Dr. Strother.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Janelle Strother, and I am the Assistant Commissioner for Student Success here at the Coordinating Board. This item for the board to consider is for adopting new board rule concerning the establishment of College Connect courses, an optional dual credit or dual enrollment program. This new rule provides clarity for institutions and is built on existing authority to offer dual credit and dual enrollment courses for students who are not yet college ready by providing access to college level courses with additional support to ensure the student's success in gaining high school credit and potentially also college credit. Institutions have the option to deliver these courses in one of two modalities, in dual credit or dual enrollment. These courses will interweave supportive, integrated skills curriculum and standard college level coursework, providing students access to the tools to take on college level work. In the rule, subsection C lists the criteria for student eligibility for the College Connect courses by either demonstrating college readiness or by showing exemption as non-degree or non-certificate seeking. New subsection D was added in response to comments. This provision states that institutions may add additional eligibility as necessary to determine a student's college readiness to enter the course. Subsection E encourages institutions to offer College Connect courses from their core curriculum as those courses transfer across all public institutions in Texas. In addition, institutions must include supplemental content such as prerequisite coursework for students who have not yet demonstrated college readiness. Subsection G contains additional academic policies ensuring students enrolled in a College Connect course must finish with 2 grades, with a college level grade determined by the institution. In addition, this subsection encourages institutions to adopt academic policies that provide the maximum latitude to a student to withdraw from the college level component for a low risk experience for the student. And finally, subsection H restates that dual credit courses may receive formula funding and that institutions may waive tuition for these dual credit courses. During the 30-day comment period, the coordinating board received 5 comments and made edits to the rules based on these comments. As a reminder, subsection D was added to the rules to clarify that institutions may add eligibility requirements, and subsection G was edited to address the recommendation to replace the word drop with withdraw to align with coordinating board terminology. This concludes my comments and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Strother. Members, do you have any questions? If not, do I have a motion to adopt new board rule Chapter 4, Subchapter D, 4.86 concerning the establishment of College Connect courses? Do I have a motion?
So moved. This is Donna.
Motion by Ms. Williams. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
Second by Ms. Hawk. Okay, thank you. Any discussion? If not, members, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition, no. If not, the motion passes. Thank you. Next, agenda item 7 is lunch, but I'd like to continue on if that's okay with everyone. So we'll go on to agenda item next, which is 8 and 9. Agenda item 8 is discussion and possible action to hire and set the compensation of the board's internal auditor. Agenda item 9 is consideration and possible action to approve an increase in the commissioner's annual salary. These items will be discussed in closed session. The board will meet in a closed meeting to discuss personnel matters on agenda items 8 and 9 pursuant to Texas Government Code sections 55.1.074 and or 551.071. The board will meet in executive session on agenda item 8 to deliberate on appointment and employment of the internal auditor, and agenda item 9 to discuss the performance and compensation of the commissioner and receive any legal advice necessary on these two items. No other business of the committee will be discussed, and no final action will be taken in closed session. It is now 11:52 p.m. and we will convene in executive session. Board members, we will now move to room 2.006 for the closed meeting. Board members that are actually attending virtually, please remain on the Zoom call while the staff assigns you to an executive session breakout room. Please be patient as it may take a little moment or so before you see the pop-up message asking you to join the virtual breakout. You will automatically be moved into the executive session as soon as you click on Join Breakout Room. Thank you.
We're ready when you are, Dr. Perez.
Okay, thank you all. It is now 1:28 PM. The executive session has concluded. No action was taken during executive session. The time is 1:28 PM. The board is now reconvened in open session and a quorum is present. We will now take up agenda item 8. Members, do I have a motion to delegate to Commissioner Keller and the chairman the authority to hire for the position of internal auditor and to set the salary within the parameters discussed by the board?
So move.
A motion by Dr. Wong, a second,
Second.
second,
second by Ms. Williams. Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, members, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition, say no. If not, motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 9 is consideration and possible action to approve an increase in the commissioner's annual salary. Members, do I have a motion to approve an increase in the commissioner's annual salary to the maximum amount authorized under the General Appropriations Act?
Make the motion.
A motion by Mr. Clemmer. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Ms. Hawk. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Members, those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition, say no. Hearing none, the motion passes. I will now hand the gavel back to Mr. Wilson.
There's the gavel.
Is he there?
I'm here. Yes, I'm here. I'm just asleep. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to find the gavel.
This concludes our meeting. The time is 1:30. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Clemmer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second? All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Hearing none, we are hereby adjourned.
Thank you all.
Right. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey.